When Pennsylvania began to gradually emancipate slaves in the 1700s, they left out of slavery very wobbly in the mind and lost. But that didn't stop them from finding their way in the world and making progress. Excuse wasn't the motto. Opportunity was. And Dr. W.E.B. Dubois, in his 1899 book, The Philadelphia Negro, he gives us some insight on this time in Black history. Here we go. Emancipation here was gradual, and the number emancipated small in comparison with the population, and yet the main facts are similar: the freeing of ignorant slaves and giving them a chance, almost unaided from without, to make a way in the world. The first result was widespread poverty and idleness. That was the result initially when Negroes in Pennsylvania were freed. He described them as ignorant slaves because obviously they had been blocked off from knowledge of the free world. So when they had finally touched freedom for the first time, they were way behind everyone else in resources, their psychology, culture, and knowledge in general, right? That was the pit. And it was from that position they had to start climbing. But without very much help from outsiders to navigate this new and unfamiliar world, they found themselves in widespread poverty and idleness. This was followed as the number of freedmen increased by a rush to the city. To do what? Find opportunities to make a living. The people we're discussing primarily lived in rural areas and small towns in Pennsylvania. They left those areas and went into the city of Philadelphia. Between 1790 and 1800, the Negro population of Philadelphia County increased from 2,489 to 6,880, or 176%, against an increase of 43% among the whites. The first result of this contact with city life was to stimulate the talented and aspiring freedmen. When they arrived, the more ambitious and talented people in the group became even more motivated. And this was the easier because the freedman had in Philadelphia at that time a secure economic foothold. He performed all kinds of domestic service, all common labor, and much of the skilled labor. So the talented and ambitious people in the group were able to take full advantage of all sorts of opportunities in the city. They had job security through domestic service and their skilled labor, right? No idleness and standing around for them because they took advantage of what the city had to offer. And nobody was blocking them off to any large degree from doing this at this time. So they were able to eat. The group, being thus secure in its daily bread, needed only leadership to make some advance in general culture and social effectiveness. They had jobs, so that was no problem. But what they needed was people to lead them in the right direction. They needed people to help them advance from the slave culture and mentality. They needed better organization, better ways to solve problems, better customs, better ways of thinking, and better ways to create a collective community so they could take some of the funds from these secure jobs they had and use some of it to strengthen the community with their own institutions, right? And culture is the only means to get this done. Culture is the foundation of a group, and you can predict with a relatively high degree of accuracy where a group is headed by examining their culture, right? If the culture is not fitted to move people towards a particular direction, then you could bet that those people will never get there. They're never going to get to that destination, right? Understand what's being said. And because most Negroes coming out of slavery didn't have an appropriate culture, they needed leaders to help them advance it. Some sporadic cases of talent occur, as Durham, the Negro physician, whom Dr. Benjamin Rush in 1788 found very learned. Especially, however, to be noted are Richard Allen, a former slave of the Chew family, and Absalom Jones, a Delaware Negro. These two were real leaders and actually succeeded to a remarkable degree in organizing the freedmen for group action. Both had bought their own freedom and that of their families by hiring their time, Allen being a blacksmith by trade, and Jones also having a trade. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones are who Dr. Dubois describes as real leaders. One of the events that impressed him about these two gentlemen was how in 1792, there was an epidemic that hit Philadelphia, which drove many people out of the city. And it drove them out so fast that they could not bury their dead. And he says that these two men used some of their own money to help bury the people and to help tackle that task. And they were commended by Mayor Clarkson in 1794 for doing this. Now, aside from that, Allen and Jones were two men who had a good reputation amongst the Negroes. Dr. Dubois says that these two loved their people, but they looked at them with sorrow because of their apparent uncivilized state. This condition of the Negroes is what brought these two men together to form some type of religious body to help the people at first. He says that they tried to find others who shared this same mission, but there were too few of them. And the ones that they could find, they often shared different religious views, right? So that wouldn't allow them to unite. So eventually they decided that the society that they called the Free African Society should be formed without it being religiously based. But the people did have to have good morals and live a sober life to be in this society. The society met first at private houses, then at the Friends Negro Schoolhouse. For a time, they leaned toward Quakerism. Quakerism is a sect of Christianity, but it varies in its interpretation from mainstream Christianity in many ways. Quakerism deals with the inner light, right? They believe that the divine, or what many call God, can be experienced from within, and that a part of God is in everyone. And there are many other beliefs that they have, but Quakerism is what they lean towards, teaching Negroes fresh out of slavery. Each month, 3 monitors were appointed to have oversight over the members. Loose marriage customs were attacked by condemning cohabitation, expelling offenders, and providing a simple Quaker-like marriage ceremony. The society cooperated with the Abolition Society in studying the condition of the free blacks in 1790. At all times, they seem to have taken good care of their sick and dead, and helped the widows and orphans to some extent. Their methods of relief were simple. They agreed, for the benefit of each other, to advance 1 shilling in silver Pennsylvania currency a month, and after 1 year's subscription, from the dole hereof then to hand forth to the needy of the society, if any should require, the sum of 3 shillings and 9 pence per week of the said money, provided the necessity is not brought on them by their own imprudence. All good stuff, right? Giving back to the community and going towards a certain level of being self-sustaining. It was, however, becoming clearer and clearer to the leaders that only a strong religious bond would keep this untrained group together. Remember, he mentioned earlier that they decided to not base it on religion, since it was religion that was preventing everyone from joining the cause. But now they realized that for the Negroes coming out of slavery, it had to be based on religion to keep the untrained group together. They would probably have become a sort of institutional church at first if the question of religious denomination had been settled among them, but it had not been, and for about 6 years the question was still pending. The question of what religion their society should be centered around. They were leaning toward Quakerism at one point, we remember, dealing with the inner light and so forth. So why not keep going with that? The tentative experiment in Quakerism had failed, being ill-suited to the low condition of the rank and file of the society. It was too spiritually advanced for the Negroes, right? The Negro's mind was incapable of fully comprehending a doctrine on that level. The discipline and the education in the Quaker system was just too much for people who had just come out of slavery, right? They needed something that was way more simple and required way less thinking. So what did Jones and Allen suggest? Both Jones and Allen believed that Methodism was best suited to the needs of the Negro. That's what they suggested. Methodism, right? That was more suitable for their low condition. But the majority of the society, still nursing the memory of St. George's, inclined toward the Episcopal Church. So which would it be? The Methodists or the Episcopal denomination? Here came the parting of the ways. Here we go. Jones was a slow, introspective man with a thirst for knowledge, with high aspirations for his people. Allen was a shrewd, quick, popular leader, positive and dogged, and yet far-seeing in his knowledge of Negro character. Jones therefore acquiesced in the judgment of the majority, served and led them conscientiously and worthily, and eventually became the first Negro sector in the Episcopal Church of America. So Mr. Jones went with what the people wanted. About 1790, Allen and a few followers withdrew from the Free African Society, formed an independent Methodist church, which first worshipped in his blacksmith shop on 6th near Lombard. What they were worried about in the beginning, being divided by religion, that's what eventually came to pass. Now these two leaders were split, Jones with the Episcopal Church and Allen with the Methodist Church. And this gives you some insight on how all these denominations begin, right? People have different beliefs and different interpretations. And when it can't be reconciled, they divide and they go unite with others who share the same belief, right? It's the same for religion, just like it's the same with various ethnicities around the world and so on and so forth, right? That's how it's always been and how it's most likely going to forever continue to be. Eventually, this leader became the founder and first bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church of America, talking about Richard Allen, an organization which now has 500,000 members and is by long odds the vastest and most remarkable product of American Negro civilization. So the church was the tool used to organize all of these members. Both Allen and Jones came to recognize that this was the key to organize Negroes out of slavery. And it worked, right? 500,000 members is a major accomplishment for any organization. Dr. Dubois calls it the most remarkable product of American Negro civilization at that time. So it was a big deal, no doubt, right? So from here, Dr. Dubois goes on to document a couple of churches that were also established. He talks about the first African Church of St. Thomas in 1794, which he says was the first Negro church in America. He also mentions Bethel Church, which was erected in 1796 by Allen, right? He says that Negroes in this period were still in a low condition, but in general, what was happening appeared very encouraging. The condition of the Negroes of the city in the last decade of the 18th and the first 2 decades of the 19th century, although without doubt bad, slowly improved. An insurance society in 1796 took the beneficial features of the old free African society. Some small essays were made in business, mostly in small street stands near the wharves, and many were in the trades of all kinds. So they were climbing up the mountain, little by little, and doing whatever they could. Between 1800 and 1810, the city Negro population continued to increase, so that at the latter date there were 100,688 whites and 10,522 blacks in the city, the Negroes thus forming the largest percent of the population of the city that they have ever attained, which on the chart right here in his book, it shows them as being just over 9% in 1810. The Negroes at this time held about $250,000 of city property, and on the whole showed great progress since 1780. They put the work in to make the progress that they made. They came out of slavery in the rural areas primarily, right, where they were in poverty and idle. Then they went into the city and they found jobs and they positioned themselves nice and neatly in the economy. They had genuine leaders who cared about the people, and they used the church as a tool to organize them. And as they went on, they began growing in numbers in the city. And just after 1810, they had about $250,000 worth of property, right? All demonstrating great progress since gradually coming out of the bottomless pit in the 1780s, right? And now that they have a little momentum going, what's going to happen next? That's what we're going to find out in the next commentary. And so with that being said, I thank you for your time and your participation. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.